Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, the third and final volume of the, I think, besides the Bible, the most read book of the 20th century? Is that right? I think that's right. I don't know. I'm not going to look it up. Whatever. Let's just go with it. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. I have now read it 8 times conservatively. Just want to take a quick minute to tell you some of the observations that I had. Callie is very interested in this. Callie, what did you think of Lord of the Rings? Huh? You shall not pass. So first thing I recognize is the completely unique and fascinating character of Denethor. Denethor is very specifically said to have the blood of Numenor very strong in him. He is cunning, he is wise, he is penetrating. But all of those good qualities, those virtues, bring him to despair, and he leans too much on himself, his own understanding. He doesn't trust others. He gets basically surrounded by despair, and ultimately gives up in this battle. And it is this super like sad undermining of what is good in him, and shows the power of Sauron and his poisonous lies, because we ultimately learn that the reason this despair is able to endure is because he is using the Palantir, which is really like twisting him. And the juxtaposition of him and Pippin, I think, are very interesting in like this very, it's a hobbit, simple but noble, and this great man who is also noble in his ways, but almost not allowing himself, but is caught up in this despair over Boromir. Also wanted to shout out how interesting a plot point the Palantir is, that Saruman has, and that ultimately Pippin finds and sort of triggers the next step. Because at least the Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf side of this story could very easily have paused or like grown very stagnant after Helm's Deep and after Isengard. They've won. There's no real like pressing things anymore. Like, are they just gonna like slowly wander over to Minas Tirith and like the politics of Aragorn coming to power? Like, that could have done that. I don't think it would have been as interesting as, because there's no push for that, right? Like, there's nothing pushing that narrative forward. But as soon as Pippin looks at the Palantir and they think that they, being Sauron and his minions, ring wraiths, think that the ring is going or is already at Minas Tirith or at Isengard, it forces Sauron to move. And so immediately then, just like it was in Two Towers, like there's this like need for speed. In the Two Towers, it was like, okay, Isengard is emptying, they're going to kill Rohan, like we need to, if we're going to save Rohan, we need to move now. And in a brilliant move, Tolkien makes that the same case in Return of the King, except now that it is Gondor. Gotta move now, or Gondor's going to perish. That force, that push never stops until Mount Doom, until it's over. Because even after the Battle of Pelennor Fields, it's like, okay, do we wait here? No, we can't, because Frodo's probably there right now, after we hear from Faramir that he was in Ithilien. So, like, immediately there's this push, which I think is just great. I wanted to give a shout out, as I did in my other videos, to characters that get downplayed in the movies. If you've just seen the movies or only read it once, you might have forgotten. One of them is Beregond. He is the guard who loves Faramir and who shows Pippin around the city. This very kind, nice man, and very loyal to Faramir, even above laws, we find out later, as he is the one that actually breaks into the tombs of the Elder Kings to steal, or I shouldn't say steal, but like save Boromir, stop him from being burned alive by his father. And his son Bergil, I've never listened to the audiobook, so I'm not exactly sure how Tolkien wanted to say that, but he's very fun because Pippin gets to tour the city with him as well. And it says very simply in the text that Pippin hadn't had as good a company as Beregond since he left Merry. And I think it really, like, for some reason that triggered what Tolkien thinks or conceives of hobbits as. Because obviously Pippin is much older than Beargal and at a very different stage in life, even by comparison the stages of life of hobbits and men. Because Pippin, I believe, is like 30, and they're like 31. He just had come of age in Hobbit reckoning. But Beargal is like, I think 10, 11, something like that. So like in human reckoning, even not even close to being a man, not of age. And yet, Pippin finds this a good companion to him. I think the point there that I see is that hobbits are basically have all the joys and delights of human children while having sort of the abilities, or if not abilities, like responsibleness, or I don't know the right word for it, but the capacities maybe of adults, that they don't lose their childhood wonder when they grow up, which I think is a really cool concept that really came to the front when Pippin is at the forefront at the beginning of Return of the King. And that's emphasized even in the fact that despite him, his best friend being like a 10-year-old boy in town here, he's well spoken of, well thought of in the city of Minas Tirith. He's said to be the prince of the halflings. And people really respect him, and multiple people from Denethor to common people to Gandalf talk about him being fair spoken. So it's just this very interesting focus on a simple hobbit, because I think we're always led to believe that Frodo isn't a regular hobbit, and even Merry in some ways is sort of this greatest of hobbits. But Pippin hasn't really been that, at least to this point, and this is where he really kind of shows that true color. But I think it also shows the really great nature of hobbits, and that comes in also later on down the road, obviously in the Scourging of the Shire. Something the movies don't make clear that I think the books do a good job at is that the entire world is aflame in the fight against Sauron. It is not just Gondor, it is not just Frodo and Sam, Aragorn, Pippin, Gimli, Gandalf. Fights are happening all over the place. There's fights on the coast at the great mouth of the Anduin. There's fighting in different quarters of the Gondorian Kingdom, or Gondorian Kingdom of old. Obviously, Rohan we focused in on because that's where we were. But also Lebanon and Belfalis. There's very clearly and specifically said that there's a bunch of battles happening there. So, the world is not just, Minas Tirith focused. Because of our story it is. But this battle of the ring is everywhere. Elsewhere in the appendices you read about the dwarves in the north also fighting battles. There's hints of what's happening in Dale and by the Lonely Mountain. Mirkwood is still in shadow, and Dol Guldur and the evil spiders. That stuff is still happening all throughout the world. And we find even in the north, obviously, that's true as well. So that's very clear in the book, more so than in the movies. Quick shout out to the journey of the Rohirrim and Aragorn to get to the Battle of Paul Northfields, or the battle for Minas Tirith. There's a lot more there than in the movies, right? The Grey Company comes, the Dunedain from the north. I like that aspect of it. I think it's a really cool thing that you don't get if you just watch the movies. Same with the Hillmen, who nobly help the Rohirrim get to Pelennor much quicker so that they can help in the battle. A little problematic because I think there's definitely a sort of nativist streak there, of these uncultured men. I think actually it says at one point. Witch King, pretty freaking awesome. He has, so in the movies, obviously for obvious reasons, they have him have his hood up. But in the books, he's just like this. He has his hood down. He's just this headless guy. All you can see is his crown. That visual is freaking awesome. I love the character of Theoden. He doesn't get as much play in the movies as he does. This fatherly figure, and it says he is as a father to Merry, and he's really taken when that happens. I find that incredibly sad. Fast forwarding past Pelennor Fields after they win that, I also thought it's interesting. It struck me again, how slow or how long it takes for them to travel to the Black Gate. Again, for obvious reasons in the movie, it's just oh yeah, they're marching, they're there, and they go out the Black Gate. But that's days. I think it takes them a week to get from Minas Tirith to the Black Gate. It's just kind of funny to think about. After this huge battle, they're just kind of traveling, taking marches. It's just, I don't know, I find it funny. In that same vein, I forget how long it takes them after the story concludes to get home. Sort of emphasizing what I've said a couple of times, it is so interesting that looking at Lord of the Rings, primarily, the largest portion of this is people traveling. And that's it. Even after the great objective has been concluded, we read about them traveling to Isengard, and then they slowly go through the Gap of Rohan, and then kind of go through Lothlorien, and then, it's very slow. They stay at Rivendell a little while, they go past Weathertop, and then through Bree. I think it's just very interesting how much of this story is travel. At the end of this road, there's still a victory that needs to be won after the major victory, and I think that's a beautiful, I'll say this a lot, Lord of the Rings is Return of the King is the most, I think, heavily themed of the books, or of the parts of the single work. It just drives home a lot of this stuff, and Gandalf says it very well. When they're at Bree, he's not going to go with them, he's going to go talk to Tom Bombadil, but he says, I'm not setting things right anymore. My fight was against Sauron. We did that. I've trained you. Go fight your battles. And there's always battles to be done and won. Maybe not physical ones, but metaphorically. And then obviously in the Shire, we see that the four hobbits are able to stand against this smaller evil and retake the Shire for goodness. And I just love that. Another shout out, backing up a little bit, Faramir and Éowyn, that romance, the tops, best romance in the work, way better than Aragorn and Arwen. Maybe Legolas and Gimli. That'd be the only other possible one, but even so, Faramir and Éowyn are definitely the best. I gave a shout out to Fatty Bolger in the first one. Want to give another shout out to Fatty Bolger here. He's one of the hobbits that stands up for what he believes in, and he gets thrown into the jail at Mickle Delving. I also want to say Lobelia is pretty awesome. I love that her arc is that eventually she does stand up against these people, even though they used her to get at Bag End and get back at Frodo and the hobbits. Sharky or Saruman does that. Love that. And finally, to end Return of the King, this very beautiful, dark, sad ending is that Frodo has been so harmed and hurt by this journey to defeat evil that he can no longer enjoy it. And he has this beautiful speech to Sam, I think it's in the Grey Havens chapter, where he says, I sometimes, for people to keep the freedoms and the things that they have, other people have to give them up. And he is so injured, he must go on to the Grey Havens and then ultimately to the lands in the West to find true healing. I think it's quite clear that Tolkien is drawing on his experience in World War I, that many came back, but they all came back changed and normally for the worse. A whole generation of men in England dealing with incredible trauma and were never the same again, despite the fact that they sort of fought this good fight. And then, of course, in Tolkien's own life, that carries on over into World War II as well. This idea that you don't just get the happy ending because you fought. Sometimes it is a sacrifice that will be final. And people talk a lot about how, no one dies in Lord of the Rings, but the hero at the end does pass away. He doesn't live his full life. He doesn't stay in the earth. He does pass away in a very specific term. And I think that's powerful and often overlooked when people talk about Lord of the Rings. That's my 8th read through of Lord of the Rings. Loved it so much. Let me know what you thought of my thoughts. And if you have anything to add, as always, first in, last out.